Hi everybody, another panel, actually a very heavyweight panel in terms of meaning for early stage startups. So we will be speaking about overcoming the valley of death specifically in deep tech, so which is quite a different beast. Today we have here very interesting participants, actually that are on the front line of doing, building, creating, envisioning policies and implementing those from government side. So I would like to welcome to this stage Raimonds Lapiņš from Ministry of Economy of Latvia. Yes.
I can choose place?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
I will take the middle one to hear everybody. So we also have Marko Koski today here, who is not from ministry side, but from venture capital, from investment, from acceleration, and all this ecosystem, very important stuff. Marko? We have also another representative from Ministry of Economy and Communication Affairs of Estonia. So we have Sigrid here today with us. Sigrid. Great to see you.
Sure.
Please take one of those seats. And Peter, who is a very experienced consultant in deep tech for early stage startups and later stage as well. I would also allow everybody to introduce themselves. Hi, Peter. Whew. So now, as we are all seated, and the thing is that this panel is actually recorded, it is interesting how we would get back, maybe seeing it in 2 years, and let's say how young we were in terms of the value of deaf support, because there is never enough. I know governments do a lot. Innovation is very important. It's priority in different governments. Knowledge-based economy, we all hear about this. But I would like to start with a question to all of you to just have a common ground about how different do you think is the value of deaf in deep tech than in any other industries?
Let's
start, yeah.
With an introduction. First of all, thanks for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here in Riga. As a head of innovation policy in Estonia and Ministry of Economy, we deeply are concerned, of course, about how to foster companies to invest more into R&D. But as you asked about what's the difference in terms of value of death compared to regular companies and deep tech companies, then, well, the most obvious difference is that deep tech companies obviously need a lot more investments, a lot more capital. But I think that's not the main difference. I would say that the main difference is that the deep tech companies, more than thinking about technology readiness levels, they need to think about more about customer readiness levels. So they need to get to know their potential clients from tier level 1 level, and that needs a shift in mindsets, because in the majority of cases deep tech companies are founded by academic researchers or just very technology savvy people who might not be so acquainted to how to approach clients and investors and etc. So I would say that that perhaps is the main caveat what the government should help these deep tech founders to address.
Thank you, Sigrid. Raymond, what would be your take on this? Do you completely agree? Do you have anything to add?
Yes, yeah, clearly. Firstly, I completely agree on both points mentioned. So it's time and money, which is different for shorter to the market companies than deep tech. There is additional part which from government side is if in case of just, I don't know, IT startup, in majority cases, it's very fast to fail or succeed compared to deep tech. Then deep tech case, there is additional part of government, which at least in our case, we see a lot of cooperation possibilities and support needed because of this time, additional time to the market. There is parts when this is a regulated market, where actually product is regulated, and then all the possibilities of deregulation or sandbox solutions clearly play a role. So anything which reduce on this longer period till the market, reduce costs, clearly again, is a topic to cooperate.
Clearly, I believe everybody agrees on this position. Maybe Peter, Marko, do you have something to add to this current status of?
I think there are small things to add. Of course, what was said, that is fully true and valid. As it is in the name, deep tech means deep Death Valley. Your original question was how deep it is. It is deep, much deeper than in other startup communities. The other point is also that it is not investment readiness only from the startup side, but we should bring up the issue of investor readiness side. Because I could see investor communities, business angel networks, where most of the business angels were not ready to invest in deep tech for several reasons. One reason was the ticket size, time frame, and not being able to understand the nature of deep tech. So we should also address in certain business communities, business angels, the issue of investor readiness as well.
And I just want to add that it's not only to private investors, to public too, because it's
even more,
completely
even more,
because time frames till the market, patience in governments, even when we are planning in, I don't know, 5-10 year results, when we start to invest, we are the same anxious about where is the result.
Marko, what do you think as an investor?
Definitely time to market. So the deep tech is not only about deepness, also wideness. So time to market is so much longer than any other businesses. And the more important thing is there a market? That's kind of focusing on, as earlier statements as well, what kind of market you are building on. Is there a customer? So usually in those cases, there's some nice ideas and everything, but who will be in the end of the day paying for it? So that's different from perhaps from the other investments.
But really, you know, what is important also in 2023, that it's much better than it was 5 years ago and much better than it was 10 years ago in terms of risk appetites of investors. Risk appetites also an understanding and experience and knowledgeability of all stakeholders in deep tech. So because that's why I'm saying like 2 years from now, I hope we won't recognize ourselves how young we were in this kind of thing. However, this one thing I also wanted to add about the risk appetite of investors, that really it makes startup at some point kind of stuck, because vast majority of deep tech startups, they don't start at TRL 8 or 9 level. It's not ready-made product to commercialize. It's technology that has to be finished to become a product. And obviously, investors, due to reasons, Peter, you mentioned, and other reasons, their risk appetite is much lower. Because return on investment, because MRR is not there yet, monthly recurring revenue is not yet happening. Therefore, startups, regardless of this being the best time for entrepreneurs to and scientists to co-create companies together, there is still this vulnerability in the ecosystem, in support mechanisms to boost success rate and completion rate of transitioning from science to product to market. So what are the hottest developments, I would say, by governments? So that's why I want to ask again Sigrid and Raimonds about this. What is the vision of supporting startups, especially deep tech startups to overcome this value of death between TRL 4 and 9. So when it's not yet a product, from perspective of customer readiness, it might be already validated. So startups, obviously, founders, when they are in early stage, they look for market validation. They might even sign statements of work with companies that are willing to adopt this innovation. But investors still don't want to invest the whole bit. So there should be some support from the government. It looks pretty logical. What is your take on this? Because to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, wearing a couple of hats as entrepreneur, as investor as well, yeah, to my knowledge, it is of significant benefit for the government to invest, to give money as grants, as reimbursements to the startups that have proven that they could increase export potential of the country. So is this a healthy thought, or am I crazy that there should be those instruments by the government tailored more and more towards startups, because it's the future, it's knowledge-based economy, it's supporting birth of new companies?
All right, I'll go on. I'm happy to say that in Estonia, I think it was in 2019 or 2020, we launched, I would say, the core R&D program in our RDI ecosystem. It's called Experimental Development and Applied Research Program. And it aims exactly at this Death Valley TRL phases that the companies are facing. And although we did not design it for deep tech startups, actually what we see right now is that deep tech startups have found the program themselves, and they have found it quite useful. And what the program does, it gives out grants, but only based on what the startup needs, what the companies exactly what they need. They have the opportunity to collaborate or bring in as partners academic researchers, and we've looked at the data and we see that the companies that have partnered up with academic researchers, their application is more successful, so they succeed more in getting actually the grant. And we will be proceeding with this program. And this program is complemented with all kind of expert consultancy services for the applicants before they put out their application. We have another development in Estonia that's in process right now. We have the political mandate to set up Estonian very first research and technology organization, like VTT in Finland or RISE in Sweden. And well, the majority of innovation leader countries have their own RTOs, so that's what we are thinking, or actually not thinking, we're doing it. So I think that's another kind of, it's not a support measure, but let's say something that the government can do to support certain technology vertical companies. And we're also thinking about implementing this R&D tax exemption without actually messing with the tax system. So that's also in the process.
And regarding of instruments, what ticket sizes are you do you mean?
The experimental development program, the maximum ticket size is 2 million euros. And the company has to have some funds itself. So actually, the projects usually are something around 3 million euros.
Very interesting, because 2 million is more than enough. Even 1 million in most cases in deep tech, at least to the knowledge that I have and seeing more than 100 companies, the MVPs usually cost from 300K to maximum 1.5 million if we're not speaking about pharmaceuticals. So it seems like there's good job, good development happening in Estonia for this.
Yes.
What about Latvia? What is happening here? What are the hot trends? What for the deep tech entrepreneurs to look into?
Yes, typical typical programs which are there is grant mechanisms for early stage research and development activities. The hottest topic where the development is going on is government's funding. We have to mix two things in one. Firstly, these are long-term projects, so it's not 1 year, and it means that we have to overcome budgetary planning periods, so it's 3+ years in research. But government funding have one drawback. If we funding a whole project, then government, in most cases, public sector is stuck with failure. What I mean by this? It means that if project in early stage start to show signs that it is not performing well, in private investor case, it will be dropped, restructured, and team will reapply or fail completely, and it have to happen fast. As government's public sector's tolerance to failure is very low, it's very hard to persuade Ministry of Finance that this is okay that we lost these 20,000 euros at the beginning stage. Then it's, the system, sometimes it's even better to burn more money and to keep on this failed project as long as possible, because we don't care, it's not our money. In reality, what we care about is that what responsibility will be against this decision. So this is the hottest topic, how to structure both long-term visions that the applicant is safe, that if it's not failing, it will be funded, with insurance that this mechanism will be working the same as private sector, so cut whenever it's failing. So, and there is no very dramatic or findings. In our case, the best case scenario still is cooperation with private sector. So it's any type of funds where co-investments is done is the best. But we try to apply this for 100% funded, publicly funded research funds too. So there is 2 pilot projects from the budget money for very similar research stage, which is driven by private needs, by private company vision on final result, but where we include loop of reassurance that we check whether it is going accordingly to plan, and then cut as soon as possible. So yes, mentality probably is a little bit strange, but the competition all the time is around that you have to prove all the time that you are still alive, and this is the hottest topic, because there is a lot of possible types of failure from public sector too in this one, but we are looking what cooperation between private sector investors and public money is working better.
Thank you.
And this is, sorry, I didn't say it's and it's really in deep tech. It's in 2 fields, in biomedicine and in material sciences.
Yeah, Marko, what do you think about this whole thing as investor? How important? How do you look into this thing when startup does have something to leverage on your investment? I believe it's quite a thing to have.
Yes, one of the things I would address that you should definitely have some customer engagement early on, because the earlier you have the customers in somehow, the better the chances you will succeed in the end. So definitely it's needed, the governmental funding grants in the beginning, and absolutely, because the investors, they're risk averse, even the risk investors, they're still risk averse. So you're looking into those ones who are really kind of make it big. So governmental, let's say, European funding is extremely important. One of the things I would kind of address also, that if you think about VTT, we talk about that one, or Business Finland kind of funding you have. So what you're going to do after that one? Is there some sort of vehicles, because researchers, they don't have the team in place, they don't know how to materialize. Is there could be some sort of vehicle besides investors that put the team in place and how to put it forward to the market. So these kind of things I would kind of help overcome the valley of death. So.
Thank you very much, Marko. I would like to also address this question to Peter, with your knowledge and experience and seeing how programs develop for the past couple of decades. Do you see developments that are happening being healthy, being more pro-startup, because obviously, by no means, you shouldn't go and raise grant if you don't have customer response. This is for all startups to understand and not to become grant eaters. So that's an important thing to understand. But what would be your take on this?
Well, this is a very complex issue, and it depends which economy we are talking about, whether it is the Baltics, or it is big economies in Western Europe, or it is like Turkey, which is an emerging economy with high ambitions. So it's really very dependent on the socio-economic environment, first of all. Second, it is very dependent on the country policy, because the public grants are tools. So first, we need a well-established policy, and this policy implementation can be done through various grants. And these grants depend, again, on the phase of the startup. Which phase of the startup we want to provide grant. Then, as we all know, that the early stage, the earlier is the startup, the more risky it is. And the more risky it is, more public intervention is needed. So there are some countries who just give a small startup, just starting up, like 30,000, let's say. Then there are countries who establish their own public venture capital company, having various stages, various instruments within that national investment fund. However, it is a disturbing element in the normal equity capital scenario, because it is a kind of competing public institution versus the private investors. Also, for early stage, there are a lot of applicants. Let's say when we are talking about, let's say, up to 200,000 early stage deep tech. That could be a very normal, very early stage. Then do the grant managers, usually ministries or agencies under the ministries, do they have the capacities physically and by knowledge to select the right ones? So this is why in some countries introduced a PPP construction, which means that experienced angel investors, or a group of angel investors, or a company established by business angels, receive some grant. So it is the grant does not go directly to the startups, but it goes to the experienced angels who will do the acquisition and selection and do the investment. Of course, putting in their own money as well as a co-funding of the along with the grant. So, and then there is another problem with the grant. Time-wise, I don't know how it is working in various countries, but I know how it works with the Horizon projects. First of all, which is there is, I think, only one grant which is dedicated to early stage. That is the Pathfinder, EIC Pathfinder. If you look at that, if we are talking about the open call, that is there is one deadline a year. So it means that if you miss the deadline, like if you find out that, okay, it would be so nice to apply, the last deadline was early March, so the next one will be next year, March, you have to wait almost a year. Then it takes about 3 months to get the first pre-evaluation. Then after March, it is about September, October, when you get the final evaluation. And if you are granted, then it takes about 2 months for the contracting, and then you can start your project earliest the year after January. And then 2, 3, 4 years to implement the project to raise 2 TRLs. Do we have that much of time for innovative technologies? So the time factor for startups concerning the grant is not really suitable. So the time factor is something what we should consider as investors. It could be a supportive, but more like a future strategic development than a really co-funding instrument. So, and also what I should have started with is to have the startup, together with the early stage investors, a clear funding strategy. What funding instruments, whether it is only equity-based, grant, edit, crowdfunding, whatever tools we want to use. So I mean, I think only this question, public grant versus equity, it could be a panel discussion in itself.
Yes, indeed. But I have my own perfect scenario that I would like to suggest to you and to hear whether I'm crazy or not. Well, probably not, but I would like to hear your thoughts on this. So there is a lot of very early stage acceleration funding. So there's different accelerators everywhere. Getting your access to first capital to 20, 50K is not something that is impossible. In order to validate your hypothesis, to find your potential customer, all this stuff. Later on, when finding this customer and agreeing with the customer on the plan of how your technology is going to be productized for their needs, this is where I see this perfect combination of public versus private funding, and also from industry coming into play in some sort of proportion. So for example, deep tech startup raised the very first 50K, went to see the customer and signed the statement of work with him that if those things will happen, then they will use it on a daily basis forever. So for example, for startup, it is only then when revenue can be generated. But at this point, when you have statement of work, you can understand how much money it would cost. So, and you could divide this between industry paying for it, as there are different mechanisms, plus raising capital to back this up from investors. And third one, and I believe this is very important thing in terms of competition between ecosystems, where public funding also steps in to help investors leverage their risk. So that's my formula that I believe would be very healthy for ministries, for the governing agencies of those funds to look into and think of how to manage this, how to implement this, and how to score it. What do you think about this being as healthy?
Actually, this model has already been developed a couple of decades ago, which was called Cooperation Research Center, which was helping academic spin-offs working together with big companies as well as government grants. So this is a classical triple helix type of thing, and this Cooperation Research Center model worked in many countries.
Then why it is not working right now in, I believe, well, at least in small economy countries, where it is possible to develop inner instruments to get to compete for talented teams? Is there
policy?
Yeah,
that is a starting point. So it's not the instrument what you design first; it is the policy what you design, and then the instrument should serve the implementation phase of the policy.
Well, I think that as Estonia and Latvia are both comparably small economies, small countries, our major challenge is talent acquisition and the attraction of talent because deep tech, I mean, it's technology in certain verticals, and there can be only a handful of talent that can contribute into some very specific technology developments. And the talent, the competition on talent is global, it's international. So I think perhaps even Estonia and Latvia are not facing the challenge only themselves, but the Nordic countries as well. And they are, I mean, they're much bigger in terms of resources and capital and etc. So I like your formula. It ideally it should be like that, but it has specific challenges in terms of talent. Was one thing that I mentioned, but I'm quite certain that actually the deep tech ecosystem as a whole is still in its infancy. We've had these research centers, all kind of clusters, etc. I mean, there's a menu of support measures that we have seen. And of course, you're right to ask, so why don't they work? I think it's there's a need for this shift in mindset, that these ecosystems need to work on a slightly different purposes, and they need to realize that they are actually competing on talent, because it only comes down to talent. The investors look at your teams, who is on your teams. I would say that from my experience, the public sector investors, be it then investing in fund of funds or in grants or other kind of support measures, we also look at the teams. I mean, it's actually the teams who, in the end of the day, will deliver the result or will not.
All right. Because that's just very interesting thought that I would like really to understand whether it could work, because I see that it could be also developed into an instrument for the government to even make money from the startup. So it's not 100% grant. It could be a revenue sharing model afterwards, as you know, like sort of a promise. So before we finish, I would like Raimonds maybe hear your remarks, and Marko.
But in real life, why is these complicated instruments, when you have to adjust decision making in several players, is not working? It's down, I'm sorry to say, but really to physics. It's like two-body problem. It's becoming, you can't synchronize people in such a way. It always will be some kind of inefficiencies in the system. And that's why if you develop very complicated system with simultaneous decisions in several players, it's not working. Where we are going is that it's much better to have composition of instruments like specific grants, but keeping in mind that we are not ready to grant anything up to 100%. It have to be around half of costs. Then we have to support risk capital, VC industry, and in this region, in these three countries where we in the Baltics, the market still is so small that naturally occurring funds which don't tap in government support mechanisms is not very often players in this market. So we are supporting, not establishing risk capital funds by governments. In all three countries there is none risk capital fund which is owned by government and where we are investing. So it's co-funding mechanisms for risk capital. Then if you add in a game, like in our case, tax scheme through the law on startups, and if you add cooperation mechanisms with universities where you have incubation support mechanisms in place, then you have several mechanisms and team can choose the composition of most appropriate. That's why I'm not very believer in tailor-made, very precisely adjusted mechanism which will solve the problem, because it's then down to talents in public sector, because most probably there will be one guy who will not want to work, another guy who in this time is sick, and that's it, system is not working for you personally. While technically we can report that the system is cool and working. So, and that's why most probably in this region, Baltics, I think that we are going very similarly, all the countries, that we try to cover several mechanisms which are targeting the same group. But it's not covering, you can't solve the problems through the one instrument alone, you have to combine it. And then we can get away from the government failures and be supportive, just the public sector. Public sector investing in these parts where it's too risky, and private sector is showing that this is still, there is a sense to invest.
Thank you very much, Raimonds, for your opinion. Marko?
I'll be very short. Couple of things. Let's just one very short thing. It's a global competition, so we should definitely more cooperation between the smaller countries, because otherwise we're competing against China, we're competing against USA, so we should cooperate more and get, let's say, customers involved early on, and those are the key factors, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Marko. Thank you very much, all panelists, today for discussion. Now I know what type of suggestions I need to bring when speaking with governments, and to maybe either change my mindset or change the world around me. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. A round of applause. Peter, Sigrid, Marko, Anton, and Raimonds. Thank you very much, dear panel.